We've seen this tit for tat between the states and federal government when it comes to this vaccine rollout. It helps no one. But whose responsibility is it?
Well, look, I think it's obviously both a federal and a state responsibility. And of course, it's also the responsibility of local providers. So it's a complex matrix of responsibility. And that's, I guess, part of the problem. But the main issue has been supply. There's no doubt about that. There just hasn't been enough supply, and that's been compounded by some lack of transparency in some situations, and also perhaps some perhaps not perfect coordination, or some people would argue incoordination in some settings, which has hampered what supply has been available getting out there.
Well, let's go to that supply issue, because as of the 22nd of March, last week, CSL was meant to be producing 1 million doses a week. According to Greg Hunt, only 830,000 of those from CSL has been dispatched. That's the information, the most up-to-date information I have. So at this point, even, you take out the vaccines that the EU cannot and will not deliver, we should have about 2 million vaccines in the system at the moment, conservatively, shouldn't we?
Well, actually, we're not really clear about this. I mean, you've quoted some numbers, but I'm not quite sure what the real numbers are. There hasn't been total transparency, at least in my mind, about exactly how much we have, where it is, and of course, then how to get it delivered most effectively. And I think that transparency will be very important going forward, because we want everybody in the population to feel comfortable with what's going on. And I guess this isn't making people feel terribly comfortable.
We've seen some mixed reports about the effectiveness of AstraZeneca. We see Canada, for example, halting the rollout of that particular vaccine for an older cohort of its population. We're not doing that here. Is that the right approach?
I think we are taking the right approach. Look, based on all the published data and other data that's available that I've seen too, it seems very clear the AstraZeneca vaccine is very safe and it is effective. And, I realise there are and have been some concerns, and these are very important to highlight and discuss. But stopping and starting vaccination programs really does lead to major problems from past experience with major vaccine rollout. So you just don't want to do that unless there's an excellent reason, and I don't think there is at this stage. So I think the government's doing the right thing.
Yeah, we're seeing that in France at the moment. The slow rollout is really painful in France and across EU nations at the moment, because they did halt the AstraZeneca vaccine and then resume it without any changes. So that seemed like the wrong course of action. I have, Professor, noted a change in tone from Greg Hunt and the government over recent weeks, and that is that Greg Hunt seems to be saying now that, yes, we're going to get all our first shots by October. We're going to charge towards vaccination by the end of the year for everyone in Australia who wants it and can get it. But now he seems to be saying we need the rest of the world to be vaccinated as well. Does that indicate to you that our international borders may not open up for quite some time yet?
Well, look, it's obviously up to the government, and we'll have to wait and see. But I think it's unlikely, based on what we know today, that international borders will open up this year. I mean, it's hard to be absolutely sure, but the rest of the world really does need to catch up and also control the virus more effectively at the same time. That's what really ideally would happen for international borders to freely open up. The problem, of course, is the introduction of variants back into Australia if we're open. That's the problem, and that's the real issue behind the concerns I think you're hearing.
So the slow rollout of our vaccine, does that leave us more exposed to these variants?
It certainly would be better if the population was mostly vaccinated, because the evidence suggests for most of the variants, the vaccines that will be given out will be protective. So at least partially protective, perhaps much more than that. there's more data coming. So I think, yes, rolling it out speedily is the ideal. We're in a very good situation, though, in terms of community transmission. So that's the good thing.
Yeah.
The worry remains quarantine breakouts, as we've seen. And obviously, we don't want more lockdowns. We want to have internal travel, at least within Australia, free and open. And the vaccination program really is key to that.
Well, let me ask you about the medium to long term then, Professor. We are, it appears at the moment, perhaps victims of our own success. As you put it, we have hardly any community transmission. We see very small outbreaks from time to time. But once we are all vaccinated, well, a large portion of the population, what happens then? Are we going to have to learn to live with the virus or keep our borders closed?
Well, I hope we won't have to keep our borders closed. We'll have more data on exactly how protected we are from variants and if there are newer variants emerging. That's the worry people have, that even more variants may emerge with the large numbers of people infected in other parts of the world. That's the real worry. Look, I think in the medium term, it's vaccinating most of Australia, hopefully, and having our internal borders open and having really minimal issues with the virus, because I think quarantining is getting better and will become even stronger and better over time. But the issue of the international borders remains a big question mark. When can we open up? When will it be safe for us all to travel overseas and come back? Will we have to quarantine or not? If we do this, they're issues that are yet unclear. And I think it'll be later in the year before we really understand the full extent of that.
But Professor, do we need to be realistic? Are we ever going to be 100% rid of COVID now? Or do we need to learn how to live with it in the long term?
I think in the long term, we're going to have to learn how to live with it. I think there'll be booster doses of vaccine that will probably emerge, that will be needed perhaps in the future. But I also think, like the flu, we'll be able to travel. There'll be some minor risk, but it will be back to close to normal or near normal. And I don't think that's too far away. So I'm reasonably optimistic. But this year, I wouldn't be counting on travelling overseas too much.
Okay, well, that's not great to hear on the Easter long weekend, but we are optimists and we remain so here at Sky News. Appreciate your time, Professor.
Thank you.